Good evening, everyone. We are going to be able to start with some chanting this evening, but we'll start first with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, help us to understand on the deepest level the inspiration and the wisdom in this great scripture. Help us to feel Master's consciousness coming through with the power that he said would bring millions to God. We are your children. Guide us and bless us in every way. Om Peace. Amen.
despair. Wipe thou their tears, those who are in despair. Wipe thou their tears. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, they have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, they have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, those they have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, they have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, they have heard thy name. The blind, halt, and lame, those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? They have no one, Lord. They have no one. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name.
peace. Amen. Okay, my friends, that's a nice way to start, isn't it? So, we are working with, as you probably know, the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, Swami Kriyananda's articulation of Yogananda's teachings on this subject, remembered from when he worked with Master in 1950, 51, when Master wrote this book. So we are on chapter 6 of the Gita, stanza number 32, which is the chapter of the book called The True Yoga. The book chapters don't match the Gita chapters. I'm just curious as to what chapter in the book we're on. Let's see, it's chapter 18 of the book, but there's 18 stanzas, 18 chapters of the Gita, and it's only number 6. So all those numbers doesn't mean anything, because it just matters what it says. So, stanza number 6, chapter number 6, stanza 32. O Arjuna, the best yogi is he who feels the needs of others, their sorrows, their joys, as though they were his own. That's an actually very interesting verse, because so many people think of yoga because of the concept of detachment, that it would be the ideal yogi would be the one who doesn't, who just moves through life and nothing really touches him. And over the course of many years of being in the ashram world, as I have lived my whole adult life there, and seen many hundreds, probably thousands of different people living spiritual life in all different kinds of ways. Hundreds I know well, thousands I've encountered. This is one of the trickiest, really one of the trickiest parts of how we figure out how to be spiritual people on a path that emphasizes detachment and renunciation, when, in fact, the best yogi, that's what's even written here, the best yogi is the one who feels the needs of others, their sorrows, their joys, as though they were his own. And at the same time, we're constantly being exhorted to not be tossed about by the sorrows and joys of this world. There's a point I've been wrestling with in my own self recently, just trying to observe myself honestly and understand what it means. I've never been a person who has paranormal experiences. I don't have any visions, nothing like that. Nothing unusual ever happens to me. I'm actually trying to think, no, nothing out of this world, you know. I'm a karma yogi, I'm a bhakti yogi. I also love the wisdom aspect of the divine. And my whole life has changed from being on the spiritual path all these years. I'm a completely different person, I believe, than I was when I started. And I can articulate, and I know it's true, and increasingly I'm coming to the edge of how true spiritual consciousness is completely different. Just completely different. Everything looks different. And the radicalness of that is just right there on the edge of my awareness, but I haven't crossed over into it. So these contradictions, I probably can't do anything to help you understand it any more than I do, except that it tells us who we're supposed to be. See, it's very important that our spiritual life be guided by men and women of realization. Swami wrote a book about the Bible, in essence. It's called The Revelations of Christ. The Bhagavad Gita scripture, Swami goes verse by verse by verse and tells us what was in Master's manuscript, what Master said. Swami sat there when he dictated it, and he sat with Master and turned the pages. And even though he didn't have the manuscript in front of him when he wrote this book, Master gave him the superconscious power to remember what Master had written. When Swami wrote The Revelations of Christ, Master had never told him that he should work on that book. Master brought him to edit this book. Master told him to edit his commentaries on the Rubaiyat. Swami also took it upon himself to write a commentary on Patanjali based on what Master taught. But Master never told Swami that he should edit the Master's Bible commentary. So when Swami picked up that book, he just picked it up from a completely different angle, and he didn't go verse by verse. SRF has published a book, Self-Realization Fellowship published a 2-volume book of Master's comments on the Bible, but and also Master published a 2-volume commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, edited by Mrinalini Mata. And Swami's book at least resembles the SRF book because it's verse by verse. But the book that SRF published about the Bible, Swami's book doesn't resemble at all. It's called The Revelations of Christ, and it's a wonderful book. I'll just give a little, sort of promotion for it. It's a very intuitive book, and you just kind of have to enter into that book and just flow through it without trying to impose some kind of linear pattern on it, because it was really just an intuitive flow. The primary message of that book is really simple. The only people who can speak for the saints and the only people who can tell you what their scriptures mean is those who share their consciousness. So in the case of Jesus, where there are so many interpretations, and they all fight with each other, and many of them fight with Sanatana Dharma. They fight with the eternal truth from which Christianity springs, from which Jesus' teachings spring. So who has the right to say what is what? That sometimes there have actually been scholars, Bible scholars have gotten together and voted on what it means. Just 51 of us think it means one thing and 46 think it means something else, so it means what 51 think. And it's just not the way it works. It's revelation. So in the same way, when we're trying to understand what this verse in the Bhagavad Gita means, or what it means to be a yogi, you have to look to the saints. You have to look to those who are having a revelation that matches the revelation of the founding revelation of the teaching, in this case Krishna, who is Babaji or Jesus or whomever. You have to match that consciousness, because people can just make up the darndest things. And so this contradiction between detachment and the best yogi is the one who feels the sorrows and joys of others as if they were their own, because what naturally follows from that is a profound, compassionate desire, to help people in their lives, to comfort those who are suffering, to ease the distress if you possibly can. I had a very interesting experience. I was away for a couple of days, the first airplane ride I've taken since more than 2 years ago. I tend to travel a lot, so it's really been quite different. I've hardly left home in all that time, like many others. I've been housebound, or small circumference. So I was traveling. I went to visit friends. I was in the Denver airport. And this woman, we were just going through the security line and waiting for our luggage. And we just started chatting, as people do. And I just asked her where she was going, because we were in a huge airport area. And she burst into tears. I mean, it usually doesn't happen when you ask a simple question. And she managed to stammer out that her father had just died, and that She was now, she wasn't there when he died. Now she was going to be with her brother and her sister. And then she just ran away from me because she was so upset. There were hundreds of people around, so I just, okay. And then I get into the train, because it's a big airport, you have to take this underground train. I'm just sitting there, and she comes in, she sits right down next to me. And I think she felt a little badly, or I don't know what, but she really starts just telling me how her father didn't want any of them near, and how he basically snuck to the hospital and died. And that they didn't even know he was so sick until he died. He was elderly. He had heart problems. It wasn't a tragic death. It was just unexpected. And I've had a lot of experience. More, let me phrase it differently. I've had more experience than some people have had of death because of the role I have in life. So I reassured her, I've learned that one of the things that just makes people so distraught with a sense of regret that they have such a hard time getting over is when somebody they love dies alone. And in some cases, it's much more poignant. You're there with your loved one day and night. Finally, you just go home to just get a break, get a little breakfast, have a shower. And, in the 15 minutes that you're out of the room, your mother dies. And you just feel, why did I leave? I've had people be so distraught. So she was there with that. So I told her, your father loved you as much as you love him. And just as sad as you are that he's left you, it was just that hard for him to go. And he probably knew that he wouldn't have been able to die easily if all his children had been in the room. So he needed to have you away so that he could just slip out of his body because it was time. It was the best I could say, because you could feel how sad she was. And I could easily have played the aloof yogi. It's very easy to play the aloof yogi. Oh yes, death comes to all. You can say all those sorts of things. When I was growing up spiritually is how I think about especially my first 16 years living at Ananda village. Having arrived at the age of 24 and just threw myself into that life. And I just think that I grew up during that period of time because Swami basically taught me how to be a human being. My parents raised me as well as they could, but Swami taught me how to live, really how to live. So I consider that my childhood. And sometimes we would say the dumbest things to each other, not Swami to us. And we tried not to say dumb things to Swami, although we did a lot of the time. But we'd say really dumb things to each other. Like, my father died, no one was there. I'm going to see him now. Well, death comes to us all. It's what I would say, what I used to call true but irrelevant. It's just not relevant. I need something else right now. I remember how many times when I would be, or someone would be upset because of some heartbreak, whatever it might be, and someone would say, well, don't be attached. Like, true but irrelevant. What am I supposed to do with that? It's just like, oh yeah, well, that's a really good idea. I've heard about detachment. I think I'll just be detached. And sometimes what happens is, if we don't have a realistic picture of what it means to be a yogi, we develop very serious complexes because we try to be something we're not. We feel guilty for what we really are. We start building an edifice that is actually created from the outside rather than growing like a seed from inside our hearts. These are very, very, very serious issues. And so what we need, and thank God what we have, are living examples. We either have accounts of avatars and saints, or we have recent avatars and saints. This is why Swamiji wrote the book about Master. And I wish more disciples had written books about Yogananda. Fortunately, a few have. Durga Mata has written about him. Roy Eugene Davis has written. There's a few others who have it. Swami Kriyananda, of course, has written 2 biographies. Well, Swami Kriyananda's own autobiography is actually the story of his life with Master. So it's really more about Master than about Swami. And then he wrote a biography of Swami. And in the biography of Swami, he just tells us what Master's qualities were like. And one of the most notable qualities of Master was his tremendous compassion. In the path, Swami tells stories about how Master went out of his way to help perfect strangers because he could just feel something. Swami tells this story of Master stopping at some little secondhand sort of store and just going in and buying a whole bunch of things that he didn't need and that were of no value to him. And then when Master walked up to pay for the items he'd bought, the woman totaled it up and then burst into tears. And she said to him, because it was toward the end of the day, she said, I very badly needed just this sum of money, and I'd given up hope that it would come to me. So what had happened was Master was driving by, and then he asked his driver to stop. And he got out and he went into the store. And he walked around the store, and he just, looked at things and chose this and looked at this and chose that. Because he could feel somehow this woman needed something, and he could feel it. So he went in to help her. I watched Swamiji just in countless times just give comfort. I was with him in this hotel in Spain, and was it Spain? It doesn't matter. It was either Spain or France, but I'm pretty sure it was Spain. He was living in Europe. He needed a holiday. They called us and said, "Can you come over and basically take Swami on a vacation?" So we did. And it was an off season wherever we were, so there were very few people in the hotel. And there was this one woman who was running a small shop, and it was a jewelry store or something like that. I'm not quite sure what. And it was in the lobby of the hotel. And there were very few customers, but she had to keep her shop open every day. So she was just in there every day. And after a day or two of being there, we walked into the shop, and we're looking at this and looking at that. And Swami starts talking to her, and he says to her, after a little bit of exchange of pleasantries, he says, "I see you sitting in here every day." He said, "You don't have many customers, do you? How do you pass the time?" "Oh," she says, "I have a little bit of work to do. I straighten up the merchandise. I read." Swami said, with just so much feeling, "It must be lonely." And, tears just came out of the woman's eyes like this. "Yes," she said, "it's lonely." And I had the feeling, I was standing a little back, but I was watching and listening. I had the feeling they were talking about more than being in the store. Yes, it's lonely. And Swami didn't make a big deal about it. He didn't try to tell her that God was always with her, because that wasn't what she was asking. He just sympathized, with her position. I'm not sure what he said, but whatever he said in response didn't stay in my mind, because the exchange was much more on a vibrational level. But he stayed there and continued to talk to her. Yes, now I remember. He just continued to talk to her. First just a little bit about how she felt, and then just talking to her. Just nothing of great consequence. But he stayed with her until she felt less alone. And then you could see that sort of light coming into her eyes. That's the only way I can say it. And we were there for at least a week in that hotel. And ever thereafter, whenever Swamiji would come downstairs, she would come out of her shop. She would, they would exchange a few words, and then she would just stay and watch him. Walk through the lobby, watch him walk out the door. If you're an aloof yogi, what does it matter? There's this woman you don't even know. He was on holiday. He needed a rest, but he felt it. The best of yogis feels the sorrows of others as we feel it for ourselves. Now, how do we feel when we feel those sorrows? We feel a desperate cry to escape from them. And if you have it within your capacity to at least bring a little comfort, why would we not do that? Because it involves us in this world, and because it reminds us of, of things we're trying to repudiate. But you can't repudiate them, you have to transcend them. You have to feel the power of the divine behind it all. And it says who feels the joys, not just the sorrows, which is to say that it makes us just as happy for someone else to be happy as it would make us feel for ourselves. I don't have a television. I haven't had a television for years and years. And I don't follow or watch sports. I rarely ever do. I mean, if I'm in someone else's home and that's what everyone is doing, it's not like I have a moral principle against it. I just don't do it. But I find it ludicrous, just completely ludicrous, on the high level of competitive sports, how if you're, in the final championship and you come out number 2 instead of number 1, it's like, really? Let's just be reasonable here. No, I don't have that kind of competitive, athletic competitiveness. But I always think, you played a good game, you fought the good fight, they won, you didn't. Be happy for them. It's just great, why not? I mean, that to me is the most exaggerated picture of the feeling that you have to suffer if you don't get what you want. But if you don't get what you want because somebody else got what you want, I mean, I understand, let's be human about it. But at the same time, isn't it wonderful when someone else wins? Isn't it wonderful when someone else succeeds? A friend of mine who was a professional ballet dancer, the principal ballet dancer for a very prestigious company, he was very, very, very good. But the career of a professional ballet dancer is not long. So he had more of his life afterwards than during. And he became a teacher, very good teacher. And he said to me, and it was so sweet, he said, I thought the apex of fulfillment was dancing. He said, but I found it's even more wonderful to help other people dance. I thought, what a marvelous maturation, to just realize that it's my gift, but if I can give it away and help them succeed, then it's even more. The best of yogis is he who feels the needs of others, their sorrows, their joys, as though they were his own. The needs of others also means, that we share, that we give, that we don't hoard for ourselves. The world is in a very chaotic state right now, or I should say, well, it's in a chaotic state. This is April of 2022 when this is being recorded. I know these things will be seen for long periods of time. Who knows what will happen next? But there seems to be a lot of instability right now. And just Swamiji has often talked, and has been talking for decades, because Master talked emphatically about very difficult times coming to this world. We're in a transition from Kali to Dwapara, and it's not going to be a simple transition. And many old forms are going to have to be broken. And as I've repeated in here many times, the way Swami explained it, but it's such a perfect explanation, tremendous amount of new dynamic energy is coming into the planet. And many, many people are recognizing that it's a divine energy calling us to expanded consciousness. So there's this huge movement toward the light. But there are also people who have enough awareness to feel this potential energy coming in, but they're trying to master it with the ego. And these are the brutal leaders, the selfish businessmen, the developers who are just amassing extraordinary wealth. These are unscrupulous politicians. And the tools of personal power because of technology are bigger and bigger. world leaders have nuclear bombs and huge armies at their disposal. Politicians have means of communication, means of manipulating information, ways of mass communication, and people who want money and the power that money can give them, they may have to work for it, but there's, because of globalization, there's extraordinary ways to amass fortunes that people could hardly even imagine before. So it's a very, very strange time that we live in. In this context, I went to India for the first time in 1986, and I had never been, by that point I had been to Europe, but I'd never been to the East. And I'd never been to a country where the economics were so different than the economics of Western Europe and of the U.S. And I remember arriving in Delhi like at 3 in the morning or something like that, and getting on a bus. I was on a tour. I wasn't alone. I was with a big group. We got on our bus. We're going down, down the road, looking out the window. India has changed tremendously in 30, 40 years. But it was, even then, it was modern. We were going down a street. But in the island between the lanes of the road, there were all these people living, sleeping at that point, just sort of huddled under blankets or covers. And it took me a minute to realize what I was looking at. It's just not something that in the world that I lived in that I ever saw. And I just was very conscious of the fact that it didn't have to be like this. There was no reason in the world why some people should be so impoverished as to have to live on the sidewalk like that. We had technology, we had resources, there was plenty of food in the world, there was plenty of money in the world, there was plenty of building material in the world, but we didn't really want to distribute it evenly. We didn't want to share it. In other words, the problem was consciousness. It was a very critical moment for me. I was already long since committed to Master's work, since 1969, but I really understood that when you feel the sorrows and the needs of others, at a certain point, depending on who you are, you have to start working to change consciousness. If you want to feed people, by all means feed them. If you want to heal their sick bodies, by all means heal their sick bodies. But to really fix the problem, you have to change people's consciousness. You have to help people understand that we are all part of the same reality. And we have to become the best of yogis, that we feel people's needs, sorrows, and joys the same as we feel ourselves. If I have the capacity not to have to live on the sidewalk, I will not live on the sidewalk because I feel that as a need to not do that, and I will help myself not to do that. Now then you have to get into practicality. Ananda's principles, people are more important than things. Where there is dharma, there is victory. Those are the two that we usually talk about when we say Ananda has 2 basic principles. But the third one is equally important and needs to actually be right up there because it explains everything. At a certain point, Swamiji was doing something that was not going to come out the way he had hoped. And Master, this was when Swami was living with Master, and Master said to him, you have to be practical in your idealism. I think what it was that Swamiji was accepting a man into the monastery who was totally unsuited to be in the monastery, but Swamiji wanted to help him. And that's when Master said to him, you have to be practical in your idealism. Yes, a monastic life could be greatly beneficial. Yes, if this man were able to embrace a monastic life, it could help his life a lot. But you have to be practical in your idealism. He's not suited for it. And Swami said he stayed a very short time and then just went on his way because it wasn't a practical way to help him. So Master himself lived simply, but he didn't live an impoverished life. Here we are in the United States, and in the United States these things are possible. Now, I went to Calcutta, when Mother Teresa of Calcutta was still alive, when we would go on these pilgrimage tours, which I and a few friends led for several years, so I would repeat. We would go to Mother Teresa's convent in the city of Calcutta, Kolkata, it's called now, and they were poor. I mean, those people really lived at the edge. When someone said to Mother Teresa, you know, why do you wear that, why do you wear the Indian garb? Because she wasn't Indian. Why do your nuns, you know, because they wore these white cotton saris with the blue fringe, blue trim. And Mother Teresa's response was, show me something cheaper and we'll wear that. You know, that was just her whole point of view. She worked with the poorest of the poor, and she lived not much better than they lived, just this much better. And I remember being in their monastery, their convent. They would have 5:30 Mass, and if you went to 5:30 a.m. Mass and sat through, and worshipped with them, I don't want to say sat through, but participated in the Mass, then Mother Teresa, if you were foreigners, Mother Teresa would meet with you afterwards. So we would go early, go to the Mass, which was wonderful, and then we would be there, and then the nuns would go about their day, and they lived in this sort of big concrete building, and there was this big concrete courtyard. And so the nuns had a very strict routine, and as soon as the Mass was over, every nun had 2 complete outfits, and maybe they slept in the one that they had on, I'm not really sure. But right after the Mass, they would be washing the one they weren't wearing. So everyone would wash the one they weren't wearing and hang it up, and then they would go out onto the streets or whatever it was that they did. And it was interesting because I always have an affinity with stone monastic cells. I was just watching them, and it was so familiar to me. Just like, I know this, where you have nothing and you just do this. It seemed, well, familiar is the word I would use. I wasn't drawn to it, but it made sense to me. That's what I want to say. Because I know many Americans especially would come and see that. It doesn't make any sense. To me, it made perfect sense. I understood perfectly what they were doing. And I could feel the wonderful freedom in it. But it's not the life that's been given. Master said it in a most interesting way. He said, first he said, Saint Francis, whom he considered his patron saint, he said, Saint Francis was devoted to Lady Poverty. That's what Master said. But I am devoted to Lady Simplicity. That's what he used. So he said, you know, if God gives you more, you may accept more. You don't have to repudiate what God gives you. But Rajarsi Janakananda, who was his most advanced male disciple, American James J. Lynn, who was a self-made millionaire, Master talked about how touched he was when Mr. Lynn was actually mending his suspenders, I think it was, which had torn a little bit. He was mending them himself. And Master said, you know, he could buy anything. But there he is, just, you know, using things respectfully, not lavishly, not extravagantly. But Rajarsi Janakananda also had a very nice home, and he had an inclination for quality things, you know. So it's just sort of like it's nuanced. It's not a sin to live in a way that makes sense. Simplicity is a very interesting word. Swamiji always, especially in the early years of Ananda, his house was bigger and he had more. He generated it himself. It wasn't like he took it from us. He went out teaching and he sold books and he earned. Most of what he earned he gave to Ananda, but he also provided what he needed. But he never had more than he needed. He didn't accumulate just to accumulate. And he didn't accumulate he didn't accumulate merely because something was lavish. He bought what was refined, what was uplifting to use or experience, and what was needed. He needed a recording studio. He needed recording equipment. He needed a computer. He needed a program to write music, and therefore a synthesizer, you know. He needed a nice harp for the harpist in the community to be able to play. and so it was still simple. But the responsibility he had required that he live in a certain way. He even at a certain point bought a better car because he was driving a very old car that had actually been an army surplus car. That's how it had been purchased. But he said, in America, people don't respect you if you're too poor. He said, in India, they would respect me at that time. They would respect me for being poor. But in America, they think there's something wrong. So he said, and Master knew that too, that he had to present himself and his teachings at a certain level, and material refinement of a certain level of beauty. So all of this is, you have to look at the example of the saints and not just the words. So what the challenge is here that the Gita is presenting to us is that we have to participate in the world around us, the best of yogis. We can't just run away from it. I mean, physically, if we are advanced enough to live in seclusion, that's something else. But those of us who are here actually have to be here. And since many of us have families and children and spouses and parents, we can't think that we can be cold toward them and actually be following the yogic teaching. We have to be very warm. Swami himself was married for a number of years, as much as anything to show us, what it looked like. And he was very attentive to his wife, very considerate, very kind, and very, very responsive to what was important to her. Not at all aloof, like some people have misunderstood the path. So let's now go on. Number 633. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, owing to my restlessness, I've achieved no lasting results in the attempts you've taught me to steady my mind." Isn't that awful? Here's Arjuna with Krishna. "Oh Krishna, owing to the restlessness, I've achieved no lasting results in the attempts you've taught me to steady my mind." Krishna answers 634. Arjuna continued. And so Arjuna goes on in verse 634. "Verily the mind is restless, tumultuous, madly stubborn. O Krishna, I consider it to be as difficult to master as the wind." There's wonderful things in the Bhagavad Gita that make us feel not at all bad about ourselves. Here is Arjuna, one of the greatest disciples of all times, having this deep and personal relationship with Krishna. And he says, you've taught me how to do this stuff, but nothing much, no good has come of it. I've achieved no lasting results. Now, I'm sure that there's a more exalted explanation of this, but I just take it just right on the face value, which is, this is not easy what we're setting out to do. And we have to be realistic and kind. We have to be practical in our idealism. We have to not think just because it's there and it can be done, that it's going to be done just like that. Now, this is why most people don't last on the spiritual path, is because it's a long, hard road. And there has to be, I believe I talked about this in this class last time, but I'm not sure. But you have to reach the point where you absolutely know there's no alternative. And then there's no question of whether it's hard or easy. You might not like breathing, but you breathe because you breathe. That's just what you do. There's no way around it. And there comes a point on the spiritual path where you can cry out, as Arjuna is crying out. You've taught me all these things, but I can't seem to make them work. And the mind is madly stubborn, restless, tumultuous, and madly stubborn. Well, those are pretty dramatic words, aren't they? And I certainly know what he's talking about. I mean, it's not just a question of meditation, it's a question of the vrittis, The vrittis are the whirlpools of karma that we carry in the spine that just, they just ambush. Everything, you think everything is fine, and then you just get ambushed by one of these vrittis. And this is madly stubborn, and no matter how many times you can tell yourself that you shouldn't feel this way, it'll just keep coming again. Swamiji, well, Swamiji, one incident first of that was when I really thought I had this difficult relationship for many years with a woman friend, and she could really infuriate me. But then I didn't see her very much, and when I didn't see her very much, when our circumstances changed and I saw her infrequently, it was very easy for me to appreciate her fine qualities, because the friction between us was unresolved karma from the past. It wasn't really happening in the present. But if you think about the cycle of reincarnation, you can think about somebody who may have betrayed you. You can think about somebody who perhaps was just more qualified than you and took away from you something that you wanted. Perhaps you were in competition in some way. Maybe you were siblings, and for some reason your parents entirely favored that one. Or the person that you were in love with fell in love with this person instead of with you. Any number of things. You can just go on and on and on. Maybe they were your boss. Maybe they had power over you. Maybe they didn't understand you. Maybe they were a horrible person and did horrible things to you. All of that can be happening in the past. You can die, and it's unresolved. I mean, I try desperately now. I try to not leave unfinished karma on the table. But I can't always do it at all, because I'm not capable of it. The vrittis don't let me. I can't overcome certain feelings that I would like to overcome, but I have not yet succeeded in overcoming them. And if I die tomorrow, when those situations return, and they have to be finished somehow or another. So we just keep reincarnating until we're done, and we just keep having to have these experiences. And so we just can't always control. As Swami once said very sympathetically, you can't always control the feelings of the heart. There were some things that happened in our community. I was starting to tell you. So that relationship that I had, because I wasn't with her, I just remembered her fine qualities and not her awful ones, of which she had many. And so did I. But then so I casually allowed myself to be in her proximity quite a lot, but in a very short period of time, I just was right back where I'd been. I thought I was finished, and boom, I was right back. I was as upset with her as I'd ever been. I was so upset with myself, and I was just devastated. I was just devastated, and I was crying and crying. And Swami said, "This is good news." He said, "Don't be upset. This is good news. You thought you were free. You weren't. You weren't putting out any energy to get over this. Now you know you need to. Good news." I mean, it was such a turn to look at it. Just as casual as could be. No reprimanding, no telling me I ought to be better, nothing. Just like, well, you're not finished. And see, there has to come a time. I'm much mellower than I was then. I was in my 20s then. But still, yesterday, the day before, I can recite incidences of those vrittis just grabbing you again, and you just have to keep at it. And it's comforting to me to have Arjuna lament to Krishna that the mind is stubborn and the tumultuous and restless. And just, that's what it is. Welcome to the spiritual path. And if you think there's something wrong with you, then you spend all your time being upset with yourself, which is completely useless. You not only then are inadequate as a meditator or as a yogi, but you also have this terrible complex because you're inadequate. Sufficient unto the day is to be inadequate. You don't have to be mad at yourself for being inadequate. We just are, because whatever we did in the past set us up for now. And all that matters is that we make the right spiritual effort now. This is Sri Yukteswar's marvelous aphorisms. The past lives of all men are dark with many shames. That's how he puts it. Isn't that poetically put? The past lives of all men and women, all humankind, are dark with many shames. Welcome to the human race. But everything in future will improve if you're making a spiritual effort now. I mean, that's the combination that you have to, tattoo on your heart, which is sure. There's a lot in the past that I wish I hadn't done, but there it was. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But everything in future will improve if I make a spiritual effort now. So what good will it do me to quit? Quitting won't do anything to change the momentum of that karma. The only thing that will change the momentum of the karma is not to give up. My advice on the spiritual path has become really succinct. Don't quit. It doesn't matter how badly you're doing, just don't give up. Supposedly, Master said, I never heard Swami quote this, but I like it anyway. I trust most of the things that Swami said, but I heard that Master said, you don't have to, get across the finish line standing up. He said, you don't even have to get across crawling on all fours. He said, you can slither across on your belly and you're still finishing. And that's how I think about it sometimes. You can just get crushed all the way down, but just don't give up. Because you're going to have to face it anyway. See, that's what finally comes in. You're going to have to face it anyway. I had a very interesting little mental exercise once when I think I was reading a book about the dying process, and this man was describing a workshop for people who had terminal diagnoses. And it wasn't hospice, it was like, you're trying to work your way through this, hopefully to recover even. And one of the exercises that they had to follow was to make a list of everything that they were going to miss out on because they might die earlier than they had hoped to die. People who are raising children won't see their grandchildren. People who have a loving spouse won't grow old with their spouse. People who had ambitions to achieve will not achieve those ambitions. You can just start weeping just thinking about it. And people did. And they thought that was what the healing process was about. Then the second list was everything you're going to get to avoid because your life may end sooner than you expected. I'm never really going to have to find a career that satisfies me. I'm never really going to have to take responsibility for X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. I mean, just think about it. It's very, very good exercise, actually. And on one hand, you can just do that. What was interesting to me was when I tried to do that exercise, because I thought it would be interesting to try it, I couldn't really write down anything that I would not have to face because my training had already been so sufficient that I realized if it has to be faced, it has to be faced. So there would be no relief. There's no relief. I mean, yes, I might not have to face it in this body with this name, but whatever the karmic knot was, it would have to be untied. And when the day of reckoning came, it would be now, period. So if in this lifetime I got to not face this, that just means that the now is going to be that now instead of this now. We're always conscious. And the aberration that unresolved karma would create in my perfect joy would just be prolonged if I didn't face it now. Which, is a powerful incentive for doing what you can, but we have to be practical in our idealism. So there's a number of things in my life I would really like to face into and resolve, but I can't. So I have to live with both realities. It's not that I want to avoid them, it's that I know If I tried to face into them, it would get worse, not better. This is the kind of thing you learn from having tried. Because the mind is stubborn. And there you have it. So it's the ultimate challenge. Self-mastery is the ultimate challenge. When he says I can consider the mind to be as difficult to master as the wind, Swami says here that the wind is an esoteric reference to the breath, because it's like contained within Arjuna's lament is the key to how to tame the tumultuous mind, which is, of course, many, almost, eventually, in our practice of yoga, we come into this relationship with the breath, because our state of consciousness and the breath are so intimately tied, and the breath allows us to access our consciousness. Because it's hard to access consciousness, but because there's such a close relationship between breath and our state of mind, whatever our state of mind will be reflected in our breath. And because the breath is between a conscious and an unconscious reality, we can influence our breath and then access our consciousness that way. So it's sort of like if one has only the scripture and is meditating deeply, trying to understand the hidden wisdom in it, there's that word in the context is one of those things that could open out and teach us intuitively. We don't have to struggle that hard because we have the commentary. And we have masters cluing us in and telling us. The wonderful thing about the ability to pay attention to and influence the breath is that we always have it. We just always have it. As long as we are living, we have breath. And so we don't need any equipment. We don't need any special circumstance. I was very impressed, but in a context, there was a Swami. I presume he's still living. I haven't heard that he's not. Shankarananda, who has a Kriya Yoga temple in Rishikesh, and he's a devotee of this line of teaching through a disciple of Sri Yukteswar. So his teaching goes back to Lahiri Mahashaya, the same as our teaching does through Paramahansa Yogananda and Swamiji. And Shankarananda was in the United States, and because I live right next to the San Francisco airport, most of the people who come internationally who are going to Ananda Village will come through here. So he came here first, and then I drove him up to Ananda Village, and he gave a few satsangs up there. He's a very fine man. And he was going to give a satsang in our temple, and it's always interesting to me when someone comes from another ashram to see how what they offer to us. And he was very, he's a Kriya-charya. He's on the same path that we are on. And he gave an entire evening about breath. It wasn't about pranayam. He didn't teach us how to breathe or how to do breathing exercises. He just spun these wonderful understandings that all just start from the fact that we breathe. Now, this goes back to where and what is the breath? Where does it come from? Why do we breathe? Which is the same question as who am I? What am I? Interestingly, and it's a medical fact, when a baby is born, when a baby emerges from the mother's body, and the baby can be perfectly formed and look perfect, but until that baby takes its own first breath, everyone is waiting to make sure that the baby is okay. And astrologically, if you can do this, the horoscope, the moment of birth, is not when the baby emerges from the mother's body, but when it takes its first independent breath. when it inhales like this. And of course, what's so magnificent in a divine way, you breathe in when you come out, and duality is perfect because you exhale when you die. And when you're, well, at both ends of it. If you're in the room when the baby is born, which I've been a few times. I've never had children, but I've been there. It's so fantastic is the only word I can use. There's the baby, and then it's sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes it's just seconds. But those seconds are so fraught, just so fraught, until all of a sudden that baby breathes in. And when it breathes in, almost invariably it will cry. Master says it cries because when it breathes in, that's the point, because that's when the incarnation starts, that the material reality of this world comes to them. And they cry because, oh my gosh, I'm here again. Even if it's going to be a glorious incarnation, it's just, what have I gotten myself into? Here I am. So baby cries. And as soon as the baby cries, the whole atmosphere in the hospital room or the birth at home or wherever it is, the whole atmosphere shifts. And everybody, actually literally, everybody exhales at that point. Because when you don't know what's going to happen, you just hold your breath in. So and that's why it's often written like that. Well, everybody exhaled in relief. And whether they literally exhaled or not, when you hear that said, you understand exactly what it means. You just, like this. So you exhale like that. And then when someone dies, and I've had a few opportunities to sit by the bedside of someone who has lost consciousness, they're sufficiently out of their body that they're no longer relating at all through it, but they're still breathing. And you just sit there and listen to them breathe, sometimes for a very long period of time, very long period of time. And there's this marvelous because life and death is so magnetic, so magnificent, where, and this doesn't, well, I think it almost always happens. I don't have enough cases or any medical knowledge, but this is how I've seen it work. Person will be struggling to breathe in. I mean, I'm talking about the last hours or whatever, however long that period is. And all the effort will be on the inhalation. And then sometimes there'll be a sort of a pause, and then there'll be a real gasp like this. All the effort is on the inhalation. Then there comes a point, or I've seen it happen, where all the effort is on the exhalation. And as soon as that happens, you know you're very close. My sister and brother and I were with my father, and he lost consciousness. And my sister we were there many hours. My sister lived nearby. She finally just went home briefly, as a person would, shower, get some food. And my father's breathing changed. She lived, fortunately, just a mile away, because he was in a facility. And I called her right away. I said, you have to get back. And she just came right back. And very shortly after, all the effort was on the exhalation. Finally, he, and you sit there, you're waiting, because they'll exhale, but you can't, there can be long gaps. So you have to wait to see if they're going to inhale one more time. And people sometimes call that the death rattle, because that's exactly what it is. Because our life itself is defined by breath. A human life, physical life. Yogis can stop breathing, but if you can stop breathing, then you don't need to be listening to me. So, but all the rest of us, from that first inhalation to that last exhalation, that defines the incarnation and everything about it. So when we start really living consciously in that breath, that's the kind of well, that's the real detachment. That's also what Swami Shankarananda was talking to us. The more our life is defined by our breath, that's how we really become separated from this material world. It's not by closing our hearts. It's not by becoming dry. It's not by barricading ourselves from human feeling. It's from recognizing that we are life force. We're just life force. It's just manifesting inhalation, exhalation, inhalation, exhalation. Everything depends upon it. Everything emanates from it. That's why this spiritual path is so interesting. And when you're on your deathbed, or when you're on your sick bed, or if you were, God forbid, imprisoned or deprived in some way, the more we have trained ourselves to define our lives by nothing external, but by that inner awareness, by going into the inner door, through the inner door, and just living in that. And then beyond that, gaining mastery. So, next, 635. Then Krishna answers, O mighty armed Arjuna, the mind is undoubtedly fickle and unruly, but it can be controlled by yoga practice and by the exercise of mental dispassion. So Krishna says, yeah, I understand. It's tough, but it can be done. It's just like that. I mean, that's all we need to hear. This is what the masters vibrationally, and through their teaching, but above all through their consciousness, they know it can be done because they've done it. It's not like they're sitting from some superior position. This is where so much is lost in Christianity, by a sincere attempt to express how special Jesus is. So they make Jesus one of a kind, who just sprang from nowhere and will never be replicated, which, gives you makes you awestruck at his majesty, but it also makes us very confused as to what we're supposed to do. Whereas the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita tell us that the avatar is the jiva, just like you and me, who is now realized, but at one point wasn't. And therefore, all the processes and everything that we're trying to do, the reason Krishna knows, can be so sympathetic to Arjuna is, and Arjuna was also playing there's a bit of pretense in all of this. I have to sneeze, just give me a moment. Excuse me. Sometimes they come in groups, but I think that was a singleton, so we can go on from it. The reason Krishna can be so certain that Arjuna will succeed is because Krishna himself, can remember. He says in another part of the Gita about reincarnation, Arjuna, you don't remember your past lives, I remember them all. So Krishna remembers them all. And why did Krishna have a lot of past lives? He wasn't an avatar when he started. He remembers all the things he went through. So when he's saying to Arjuna, it can be done, yoga practice, mental dispassion. So those are like the two things that you have to do together. The techniques facilitate that realization, and then mental dispassion. This is where we have to loosen the grip, loosen the self-concern is actually the word we're looking for. And see, this is the subtlety between, we become self-forgetful of ourselves, but not forgetful of others. Swami used to use the word impersonal a lot. I never really liked that word because I didn't understand it at all. It took me many, many years to understand that. Impersonal means you're not impersonal about others. That's again where people misunderstand. I'm impersonal, you're suffering, what do I care that you're suffering? we're impersonal about ourselves. What we cease to be concerned about is what's happening to me. Just the best yogi is happy for other people's happiness and is eager to alleviate the sorrows of others as they would be as if they were my own. But in the concern for others, one becomes unconcerned for oneself. There's just this mental dispassion. We just step back a little bit from it. Master made the marvelous, semi-incomprehensible statement that we all make the mistake of thinking that everything that happens to us personally concerns us personally. The first time I heard that, I mean, I knew there was truth in it, but I just didn't have any way of comprehending it. And only after many, many years of yogic practice and developing a certain mental dispassion have I begun to understand how things just happen, and you don't have to cling to them in quite the same way. You feel them. You may not enjoy them at all, or you may enjoy them a lot, whatever it might be. But there's just this impersonal sense about it. That it's breath, it's energy, it's the adventure of life. This is what happens. So he says, Krishna says in verse 636, "Here is my promise. Yoga, though difficult for the ungoverned mind to attain, can be reached through proper methods if one strives earnestly to achieve self-control." Now you can think of it in human terms, but it's so much bigger than just the way human beings can relate to each other, that the masters really believe in us. I mean, they not only love us, but they have complete confidence that we will get this right. And it's a friendship that comes to us through the ether. That this is why we always talk about Divine Mother and Heavenly Father. We're trying to take what we know, what we can identify with as human beings that we've experienced, and then elevate it to infinity. So if you have a wise and loving mother, you know, your wise and loving mother can help you to succeed. I know when we talk about, we run a school here. We actually have kindergarten through high school now. And one of the longtime teachers was saying to me that, and she's a master teacher, that she challenges the students, but she also has demonstrated to them that if she asks them to do it, she will also give them the tools they need to succeed at doing it. So if you think of yourself as a young child, even, and you have a teacher that you trust, and the teacher wants you to learn something, you may be very frightened about it, but if you know from actual experience that teacher will stay with you and work with you until you succeed at it, then it just changes everything. And so we all have, those of us who are devotees and disciples, we all have the friendship of the divine. And we all have Divine Mother's love. And we have the unconditioned commitment of Divine Mother to see us through, the unconditioned commitment of the Guru to stay with us until we get it right. And that's a lot. I mean, that's more than a lot. That's everything. We're never alone, and we're never lost, because the Master is always there, and he's always going to be giving you the next step. What do I do next? Sometimes it doesn't come to us as fast as we'd like it. Often it doesn't come to us in the way that we would like it. So there is also we earn that. How do I want to say that? It's within our hands. It's our decision how deep we take that relationship. The Master will take it as deep as we will take it. As many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. But there's that received, isn't there? And that was where I was starting tonight, where we can really believe on the level of, I will commit myself, that what the Master has promised is true. And that even if I feel like I'm losing by following the path that's in front of me, I know that in the end, I will have everything that I want, and nothing will be lost. God bless you, my friends.